Hi everyone, and welcome to my very belated 2020 statistics, best books, least favorite books, disappointing books type video. I'm finally filming it. I have all of my books right in front of me. Let's see if I can show you. There we go. See, kind of with my laptop right there. And yeah, let's get started because this might or might not be a long video. So this year I read 45 books. I kept saying 46, but one of the books I had has 2 volumes into it. But if you put it into the one book, it's 45 books. I ended up reading 11 nonfiction and 34 fiction, which is an increase. Every year I've been reading more and more nonfiction, which has been a very, very lovely surprise. And it shows a very significant change in my interest these days. I read 31 male authors, 14 female authors. That's not really something I really care about since in general I read about everything. I don't favor one or the other. I read what I want to read. But yeah, the first book of the year that I read was La Guerre des Jours Lointains by Akira Yoshimura, which is translated to One Man's Justice into English, which is about a soldier and the aftermath of World War II in Japan, which is very, very good. The last book of the year I read was Natsu to Hanabi to Watashi no Shitai by Otsuichi, which is Summer Fireworks and My Corpse by Otsuichi, which has been translated into English, which is just, this has 2 horror short stories, while the English translation has 3. But yeah, Otsuichi is a horror suspense kind of writer. And then, let's see, I broke down the books that I read in terms of country, and it seems, excluding nonfiction, because sometimes you have a writer writing from one country writing about another country, so I don't think that's really relevant to statistics. But within the fiction, I read 8 books from Japan, which is very normal for me. It's usually the country I read the most from. I read 4 books from Canada, which is easily explained by the Margaret Atwood that I read. I read 2 from China, which unfortunately is low because I was planning on reading a lot of Chinese fiction this past year, so maybe hopefully in 2021 I can fix that. But I read 7 books from England, which surprised me because I keep saying I don't read that many books from England, but apparently I do. I read 1 from Ireland, 5 from the US, 2 from France, which is very low since I am French and I do tend to read French literature, but yeah, 2 from France, 1 from Belgium. All my books read from Belgium are all Amélie Nothomb. I haven't read any other Belgian books but her, so if you know Belgium comes up on the list, you know it's her. 1 book from Vietnam, 1 from Kenya, 1 from Nigeria, and 1 from Poland. The shortest book that I read this past year was Un Chant Céleste by Yang Lianke, which is 90 pages. This has been translated to Bone Marrow in English, and it's a really short but very intense book about a family in a small village in China, which I actually really, really quite enjoyed, and I'm really looking forward to reading their other book that I do own. The longest book that I read came out at 2,109 pages, and that is Au bord de l'eau by Xi Naiyang, which is translated to Water Margin, which is one of the great Chinese classics. And this was fantastic. Absolutely love this. Excluding this book, because it's such a huge outlier, I removed it from the data. And so the average of pages I read was 289 pages per book, so around the 300 mark, which is fairly standard for me. The total pages I read for this past year was 14,465 pages. I don't know if that's more, I don't know if that's less, because pages isn't something I usually look at, but as I continue with booktube, maybe that'll be an interesting data point to look at whether or not it increases or not. Pages per day dropped significantly. I started off the year reading 60 pages per day. Most of the year maybe around the halfway mark, maybe around when the Corona isolation started, I think I might have dropped off a little bit after that point. So the remainder of the year I was about 40 pages per day, and then at the end of the year I pretty much didn't read at all. November and December, I mean really little. So yeah, I ended up the year at 39.5 pages per day, which when you think about it, 40 pages a day is not that much, and yet I read 45 books. So it shows how much you can read with, very little time commitment per day. The earliest book I read was published in 1350, and once again, that goes back to Au bord de l'eau, the Chinese classic. So, gosh, this was so good. But yeah, this is the earliest book, published in 1350. The most recent book, I had a tie. Both were published in March of 2020, and that is Emily St. John Mandel's The Glass Hotel, and then My Dark Vanessa by Carrie Elizabeth Russell. I enjoyed this one as I read it, but I didn't really care for it. This one was actually quite excellent. I thought this was a very good debut. About a girl dealing with the fact that her relationship with her teacher back when she was school might not have been the romantic relationship that she had thought it was. So based on publication date, the median publication date was about 1988. The average publication date was 1974. And the most common range was between 1950 and 1970. The oldest book on my TBR list, so for me the TBR list is books that I actually physically own. Any books that I don't own are considered wishlist books, so I keep a list of books I would like to read, and then when the time comes to purchase them, at that point they become officially part of my TBR. So the oldest book on my physical TBR pile, I had two from 2009, so that makes me very glad that I finally got to them. One of them was The Tattoo Murder Case by Akimitsu Takagi, which is just a standard classic thriller. For me, the style's a little out of date. It was fine, it was enjoyable, but it's not memorable. And it wasn't actually that enjoyable, to be honest. It was fine. It was adequate. That's a good word. It was adequate. But the other book that I did enjoy, and I'm finally glad I finally got it off my pile, and actually the reason it's been on my pile for long is I hate the cover. I just never really cared for this cover. It never inspired me, but the book was fantastic, and that is The Spire by William Golding, who you should know as being the author of Lord of the Flies. I enjoyed Lord of the Flies in school, and I always thought, you know what, I should try more of his books, because I really, really did enjoy Lord of the Flies, and I had purchased The Spire in 2009, and I only got to it recently because of this cover. But yeah, this was fantastic. It's gothic, it's dark, it's about the delusion and the obsession that drives Dean Jocelyn to build a spire that can't be built because it is being built on unstable land, and it will crumble before it is ever actually finished. But he's driven by an obsession that is shown to be misplaced. So this was very excellent. Really loved that book. Very happy that I finally read it. But yeah, I would say to skip forward to where I was going to go. Worst cover, I would say. Least inspiring cover. But my favorite cover of the year was from Des Ballets de l'Opium by Lao Shiwu, which is a nonfiction about Lao Shiwu's basically history with Tiananmen Square and the aftermath of being pursued by the government and the police, and basically being bullied the rest of his life, along with his very, very long multiple times in prison. But yeah, I absolutely love this cover, this illustrated cover of the very famous unknown man who stood in front of a bunch of tanks to prevent them from being able to proceed forward. But yeah, I love this cover. I think it's absolutely gorgeous, and the book is very, very interesting. Let's see, the books the most read TBR. So the books I read, what is this data? Why did I write this? I don't remember. I did this like a month ago, preparing for this video. I have a most read TBR 2020, recent on TBR 2021. I don't know what that means. Oh, I do. It means most of the books that I read from my TBR were purchased in 2020, which is good news because that means that I'm reading the books that I'm reading. I'm reading the books that I'm buying. So that's very important for me. I'm perfectly fine with buying books, but if I'm going to buy a book, it's to read it. So for me, I try and make very small book hauls so that I immediately read those books. So the fact that in 2020, most of the books I read were from 2020 is fantastic. That's really good. And yeah, that's just very good. So then, that's all the data about the books I read. Then for the manga I read this year, I didn't read that much manga. This was a very slim year for manga. I only read 35 individual volumes. I read the entire series of the soccer manga Fantagista, which I am obsessed with soccer manga. I love soccer manga. I own so many. I plan on owning more and reading more. And I'm obsessed with soccer manga. I love every variation and interpretation of this genre because I've played soccer all my life, and yeah, I just absolutely love this. Next, I read the entire series of Cardcaptor Sakura, the original series. Because of reading this, I did end up buying the second series, and hopefully I'll read that year and maybe even do a vlog. Ooh, that'd be good. But yeah, this was super cute. Loved it. I love Kero-chan. He's the best character ever. Literally, he's probably one of my favorite characters in any series I've ever read. So that was super cute, really fun. And then I read all of the books that were out at the time of reading from Gokushifudo, which was translated into English as The Way of the House Husband, which is about a retired Yakuza member who just becomes a house husband who is very diligent. But it's super, super funny comic because everything he does, there's a pun on the Yakuza world, and it's just incredibly ridiculous and absurd. But I mean, the art, sorry, let's make it easier. The art is absolutely fantastic, and it's just super comedic. And I do have the latest volume that came out, volume 6, in Japanese. It's not out in English yet, as per the last time I checked. So I will be reading that soon because the series is just hilarious. And then, so those are the series where I read the entire thing. Then I read the first 3 volumes of Ore Monogatari in December, right before the end of the year. I will be continuing the series because it's so adorable, so fun, really funny. And I love this new take on a traditional shoujo manga. This was a really popular series when it came out in Japan, and it's definitely worthy of that type of that popularity. It's so much fun. So I'm looking forward to reading the rest of this. And then I read the first 2 volumes of Trigun in this edition, which is an anime I absolutely loved back in high school, and I'm only now finally reading the manga. The manga is actually a little difficult to read, and the art is fantastic. I mean, it's just like the anime, where the anime really did the art of the manga justice. But the way it's situated in the manga is a little difficult to read, which is why I haven't pushed on yet to the rest of the series. But I will get to that eventually because, I mean, it's just a wonderful series. And I don't remember how it ends exactly, and the ending is very different from the anime. So I've heard. So I would like to continue with this. So yeah, that's all the manga I read. So now I thought I would just do some more non-data facts. So let's start. My favorite nonfiction was The Gate of Heavenly Peace, The Chinese and the Revolution by Jonathan D. Spence, which basically goes from about like the end of the 1800s, 1896 or so, up until about maybe the 70s, early 80s of the Chinese Revolution, about how they ended the imperial system and how they got into communism. And that was absolutely fantastic. It's chaotic. This book is very dense. It's maybe a tougher read than you might be used to in a nonfiction, but it's dense because it's so chaotic, and this time period in China is just absolutely fantastic, and there's so much to read. And this is really interesting because it's from the perspective of the intellectuals of China at the time, so the authors, the people who ran the newspapers, etc. And it's basically how the government used the intellectuals to manipulate the populace, but then the government also manipulated the populace to have take control of the intellectuals. So as you push and pull between a possible democratic state and the communist state, you get this push and pull between the intellectuals and the populace, and this is just fantastic. If you're interested in Chinese history, this is definitely a must read. And it's really interesting because if you read it, you'll see actually a lot of commonalities with the world now, particularly the US. So yeah, very, very good. The other nonfiction I really enjoyed was a memoir, My Hitch in Hell, about the Bataan Death March by Lester I. Tenney. So yeah, this is about Lester Tenney's being a prisoner of war of the Japanese in the Philippines and how he came to survive the Death March and then 3.5 years in a Japanese prison back in Japan. And this is just, it's horrible, it's horrific. The Japanese were terrible during World War II, and I think this book really, really just really describes it very well. It's very emotional and very good. So this was also my other favorite nonfiction of the year. And I want to apologize right now to my reading year of 2020. I think every time I've mentioned my reading in 2020, I've been, oh, it was a meh year. It wasn't really that good. I wasn't really excited. And I need to apologize because it's not the books that were meh. It was me. I was the meh. I was the meh factor. I was the one who couldn't bring enthusiasm, who couldn't bring energy behind my reading. So I actually read a myriad of fantastic books that are well worth reading, and I feel bad because I inserted my meh energy into all my reviews, but the books themselves are actually quite good, and I'm the one who had issues. So I'd like to apologize to my reading year of 2020, especially when I'm looking at this pile, like these are good books. These are good books. I mean, other than a few, I mean, these are objectively excellent books, and I actually really enjoyed a lot of them. So it's just unfortunate that 2020 had that sort of meh filter upon it. But yeah, going into my favorite fiction of the year. So I had to make that apology because it seemed like I had no favorites of the year, but I actually do. My favorite of the favorites, I say, would be Au bord de l'eau by Shinayan, so The Water Margin. So once again, this colossal Chinese classic. I love this. It's a story about these Chinese men and how they become bandits via circumstances out of their control, the government, or being like targeted by other villagers, and how they became bandits and sort of created the very famous mountain of 180 bandits. It's very important to note, so the version I'm carrying, the French version, this actually, it's not abridged, but it is abridged. And what I mean by that is actually this book kind of has 3 parts. There's one about the original bandits, then there's a story about when they become the 180 bandits, they become the crew of bandits, and then there's a third story about how the bandits kind of fight against the emperor, but then they sort of become the emperor's army, and then they start fighting for the emperor against the Mongolians, I believe. But that third part, it is wondered if that part was actually written by Shinayan, or if that wasn't added to the story later on by a different author. That's historians aren't really sure. So that part isn't often included in the Water Margin. So in French, the Folio Classique only has the first 2 parts. It does not have the part with the emperor at the end. The only way you can read that in French is if you get the Pléiade. If you get the Pléiade edition, you can read that 3rd part, but this is the only way you can read it in French. Now in English, this book is usually offered in a abridged version of just the first 2 parts, but you can find the entire 3 parts in English. I read this with a bunch of other people last year online, and one of the women did read the 3rd part in English. So just to tell you that you really have to be careful and realize how much of the story do I want to read, what language should I read it in, and whatnot. But I mean, if you're a French reader, this version is absolutely fantastic. I really loved it. And then my other favorite book, I would say, was My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. This was fantastic. I'm actually very happy this is the movie tie-in cover because the movie is excellent, and their The movie was pristine. It was very faithful to the book. Fantastic. The book is fantastic. I really loved it. I thought it was an incredibly suspenseful thriller. And even having seen the movie and knowing what happens, I was still absolutely incredibly engaged in the book. So that was another favorite. Another surprising read for me that I really, really enjoyed was Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. I think romance can be a hit or miss with some people, especially depending on the kind of romance. Is it a little bit more sexual romance? Is it an actual love kind of romance? This is definitely a more sexual one, and I think a lot of people might be a little bit hesitant on reading those, or they might feel uncomfortable, or they might not find those relationships very believable. But for me, I actually found the relationship incredibly believable, and I thought it was well written. And I think some people could take issue at the fact that it's a man writing about a woman, but I think he portrayed this kind of woman quite well. And it is, yes, in a very male point of view, slightly mocking, slightly detrimental, but to be honest, these women do kind of exist. And I think it's a very interesting viewpoint to see how a male would interpret that kind of relationship. And it's, wonderfully written. So I really liked this, and there's some humor in it that I also thought was quite good. But I mean, just look at that cover about a man unbelting his belt, and you can just feel the kind of love or romance that this book is. It's just absolutely, I really enjoyed that one. And then the last book, so these are all classics. My favorite books were all classics, which was fantastic. The last book I really enjoyed, although there were some weaker points. I thought there was a little bit within the book that kind of slowed me down. But I loved the book in whole, and that was Melmoth the Wanderer by Charles Maturin. And this was a total surprise. I found this in a $5 box. I never heard of it, and I knew nothing of it. I had just read that it was a gothic tale on the blurb when I picked it up, and I was like, all right, I'll get it. And I thought this book was fantastic. I mean, it's basically about Melmoth, who's an immortal, who is trying to manipulate others into his situation. And it's a story within a story of a story about people who have encountered Melmoth the Wanderer. And it's absolutely fantastic. And I mean, the book is worth reading just for the monastery scene by itself, because that scene is powerful. It's incredibly, it's frenetic, it's beautiful. There's so much to say about Catholicism in Spain at the time, and this obsession about turning people to believe into God and forcing them to believe in God when they don't want to. And I thought that monastery scene is, I mean, just that scene alone, if you just read the first half of the book, just that would be worth it for me, because that scene is so powerful and so amazing. But yeah, I really liked that. And then let's see, I think my two most disappointing books, one was an essay, Petit Éloge de l'Errance by Akira Mizubayashi. This was disappointing because I really loved his other book, Une langue venue d'ailleurs. This one just did nothing for me. It didn't bring anything new. It didn't say it, and it didn't even say something known in a new way. I was just kind of bored with this. Wouldn't recommend this. He does have another book out that I do want to read. I haven't given up on him because I liked one. I didn't like this one, but yeah, I mean, if he comes out with something interesting, I definitely like his writing style. And his newest book, whenever it's in this edition paperback, I'm gonna buy it and read it because it does sound very, very good. Another book I was disappointed with, to be honest, is Ali Wiessel's La Nuit, Night, the very famous World War II Holocaust Auschwitz memoir. For me, I was disappointed because I had never read it as a child, which I think is the best time to read this. And so I've had, decades worth of knowledge about a book I've never read. So I had certain expectations about how it would be written, how it would be presented. And I thought it was almost juvenile, which I guess, it makes perfect sense because it was written by someone who was a youth at the time of Auschwitz. But yeah, I think this is a book best read when you're young, when you're, middle school, high school is the best time to read about this because it's absolutely incredible topic. It's important. but for me, reading it now in my life, it doesn't do much for me. So this was disappointing. But most people would disagree with me. And then to not end with disappointing, but to end with gruesome, the most gruesome book I read probably this year was In the Miso Soup by Ryu Murakami, which was I really liked because you could read the book superficially as a thriller that takes part in the sleazy Kabukicho, the sex district Kabukicho in Shinjuku in Tokyo. Or you can really look at the underlying message, which shows about the sort of stereotyping of American tourists at the time, because this was written in 1996, before Japan became as open as it is now to tourism. It's before they started cleaning up the sex district of Kabukicho, so it was a lot more sleazy back then. And so this really has that underlying showing of the stereotyping of American sex tourists, Americans in general just being loud, being sort of terrifying, and I thought this was really good, and it's gruesome. If you just want to read it for the thriller part, it's also quite good. So yeah, that's it. That's my 2020 in review. I'm very happy that I waited to make this video, because I think I was able to make this video a lot more positive, because I did read some really excellent books. And again, apologies for all my meh energy. That's all me. That's not the books. So yeah, that's it. I really hope you enjoyed this very long video. It's gonna be very fun to upload. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. So bye.